Hello, Paul Hamler here. Welcome back to Paul Hamler's YouTube channel. Today we're going to do a little short video. I'm going to cover some techniques on fixturing and holding both some metal parts and wood parts. Over the years in making the miniature tools that I've done in guns and rifles, etc., I switch back and forth in the media from wood to metal. So I'm going to divide this up. One of the fixtures and techniques that I'll show you at first is primarily going to apply to planing and sizing and work holding of wood of small parts. Keep in mind, most of my work is miniature. However, some of these techniques and fixtures that I'm going to demonstrate today can very well be upsized and are very applicable to larger size wooden parts and metal parts. On the metal side of it, I'm going to show you a little idea I came up with here a few weeks back on making some really quick and dirty strap clamps for fixturing and holding small pieces of metal, either when you're drilling them, milling them, or for holding thin parts down on the mill when you're doing CNC operations. So we're going to kind of divide it up between wood and metal. And to start with, we'll look at this fixture that I made for planing and sizing small pieces of wood. Okay, the red board that we're looking at installed in the Emmerich pattern maker's vise is the first fixture we'll be discussing, and this is primarily made for planing, sizing, either rough sawn or finished lumber to get it down to a finished thickness that you need for your miniature project. It not only can you use it for sizing and planing the lumber, small pieces of lumber, you can also use it for joining the edges of it, and we'll demonstrate that as well. The first thing I'll mention here is this red board. This fixture is a phenolic type material. The major application that I'm aware of that they use it for, I think it's Lee Industry uses it for zero clearance table saw insert. So a lot of you might be familiar with that. Comes in various thicknesses. It's fairly hard on your table saw, your bandsaw, but it can be sawn. And the beauty of it is you can drill it and tap it very easy. And I use it for a lot of fixtures around the shop. As here's a small finger board used for holding small parts that's made out of the material. I don't know what the commercial name is for it, but if I find it, I will post it later on. I'm fortunate to have a industry nearby that works and makes components out of this stuff, and I can buy their scraps, and that's mostly, the small scraps is what I work from. Keep in mind, this board, once you see the flexibility and the uses it has for doing the miniature stock, you can make one out of any type of suitable hardwood. It doesn't necessarily have to be made out of this phenolic board. But let me demonstrate. For years, I would take these small parts and I would apply them with two-sided tape. Well, that gets expensive. So what we've got here is we've got a board that's easily transformed or put into your vise, or you can hold it down with a hold fast on the top. What we've got here is I drilled, and before I sawed this piece off, I drilled and then tapped this in here, and that receives 2 1/4-20 thread all rods, and then I made a series of little inserts, and you can size them to whatever you want. But what you do is you drop this insert down and just lightly snug Now you've got a stop that can also be adjusted for the height that you want. And so as you're planing, and working, once you come down to here, you know you've reached the desired thickness. Now, kind of a little thing I use to fine tune. Let's say I'll mic the piece and it's off, like this piece here. It needs to be removed to keep it parallel over here. Taking an X-Acto knife and tapping some teeth into that knife with a fine saw, I've now converted this knife into like a miniature saw. And what I can do is I can go in here and you develop a technique, but I can score and lightly make saw cuts in that piece of wood, and then I've got a visual reference as I'm planing the board. Let me change this. This guy's actually a little too thin for this piece of stock. Actually, I don't have to change it. I can raise it up. You can go in here with your square micrometer and whatever, and set your size, your final destination. Actually, no, that's too tight. We do it 100 times a day without even thinking about it. But the minute you turn the camera on, you know how it is. Okay, so with those score marks that I had, I was able to focus over here and take the material off where it needed to be taken off, giving me a visual indication. Okay, now let's say we've worked the stock down. We've got it to the thickness that we want. The next operation, I want to square up the ends and join the ends. Well, you can put it in your vise. There's several different ways to do it. This is a unit that's been around commercially for years. For holding and edge planing boards. I never have liked them. They're not very stable. So what I did is on the back side here, came up with a little fixture here. I can loosen the adjustable fence, put your piece of wood in here. It's adjustable. I like to use some type of stop to support the cam clamps, so the clamps won't go in and mar the wood. You could use anything in there. You could put a scraper blade or whatever. But now when I cam this around, I have got a very stable locked in. For longer boards, this can be made extended length. You can put more clamps in here to hold it, but a lot more stable. Now here's a lot thinner piece of stock. Let's see. Okay, that'll work. Now they're flexible. When you're not using it for joining, hey, don't forget to take your clamp out, it'll fall on the floor. Okay, try a piece of rosewood here. trying to get rid of the bandsaw marks. Okay, let's look at another application that we can use this board for. Let me turn it around here. Okay, we've turned it around, removed the stop. Now you've got a little small vise. Let's say we want to cut some dovetails here. Using this end of the fixture as a miniature vise, we can go in, lock it in. You can set the depth that the stock extends. Set it to the bottom, the base of your dovetail line. Okay, we've got our small board in there. We can actually go in and check it and make sure we get it plumb. Lock it in and cut some dovetails. Now, for small work, what I've done over the years is taken an X-Acto style razor saw, removed the back, pulled it out of the back, and just two-side taped it to a flat board for the handle. And I also prefer turning the blade such that I'm cutting on the pull stroke. So for cutting dovetails, you've got your depth set, and you're in business. Now, while we're on dovetail saws, I'll show you another adaptation I came up with using the X-Acto saw blades years ago. Put a piece of brass here, a piece of, I think it's, I don't know, 3/32 thick brass plate, and put some screws through here with thumb screws. The original idea was to slot this brass, and I could adjust it up and down, and I would have an adjustable depth stop. This particular setup here was for a production job, and this was the depth that I needed. I didn't bother to slot it, but you could slot this and build you in a depth stop. The advantage of doing it with the brass plate, discovered later, the brass plate this size gives the saw a little bit more weight and a little bit more mass. So when you're cutting your dovetails, it's remarkable how much easier it cuts and saws versus the very extremely lightweight. This is my go-to once I size it for the depth that I want. Another thing I'll share with you here, I was doing some joinery, some very complicated joinery a few weeks ago, and the cut, the notch, had to be extremely sharp. It was a wedge type joint. It was actually for one of my inlays on one of the pool cues I was making. And the challenge you get into, and this was a little bit larger piece of wood, but the principle still applies to the smaller stuff. One of the problems you get into is with a bandsaw, a back saw, or whatever, if you're coming down and your joint, the bottom of the V-cut has to be extremely tight right here, where your other piece of wood is typically going to be some veneers, and it has to come in here at a very extreme point. Well, you're going to have the kerf comes into play whether you're using a bandsaw or whether you're using a hand saw, a back saw. So what I discovered is there's some flexible knife blade material. Comes in different thicknesses and different widths. This is one of the smaller pieces. It's like 18 thousandths. but they're pre-sharpened. They use them for put them in die stamping. They can bend them and they can stamp out leather and soft materials on a pressure press. That's what they're used for. What I did is took a little bit larger one. It's 28 thousandths thick, a little more rigid, but it's still flexible. Anyway, I took it and I hand ground just some teeth in there, not with any particular precision or pattern, but let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay. So what I've done is by putting those teeth in there, again, it's kind of a cross between a saw and a knife. And what it produces is you use it just like a saw, but it's not as aggressive cutting because there's no set. So I'm relying on the knife to kind of cut a joint. The teeth are pulling the sawdust out. A little bit different feel. It makes a wider kerf than a back saw or a fine dovetail saw. Okay, let me try to bring one to a point here. I'll demonstrate. So, because this modified knife with the teeth in it doesn't produce a kerf, the joint or the end of the V-notch, get this thing set up here, there we go. Not a very good zoom there, but there's no kerf here. At the bottom of the joint, there's no kerf. It's an extremely sharp V. So, you know, put that in your bag of tricks. Maybe one day you'll have a use for it. It came in handy when I was doing the pool cue blanks a few weeks back. Now, one other thing, while we're on the topic here of cool stuff, I guess you would call it, I'll point out something that I would venture to say a very small percentage of the audience out there has ever seen one of these files I'm fixing to show you, unless you're familiar with a body shop and body industry. That's where they primarily were used, I think. These files are called Vixen, I think after the original inventor, manufacturer. Nicholson and several other companies have started manufacturing these over the years, but a lot of people still refer to them as Vixen style files. What it is, it's kind of a rigid, Surform type file. It has teeth that are sharpened, razor sharp, and they primarily, in the body industry, they would use them for filing Bondo. And these teeth on these things are extremely sharp. It takes you a little while to get the feel, get used to the way to hold them as you're working them. Here's a Nicholson. Let's see what they call them. They call them milled curved tooth file. That's very creative. So Nicholson, Superior, milled curved tooth file. Okay, now let me show you what this guy will do. Again, it's not a real common file, but I'm sure there are people out there who will argue. But piece of soft pine here, and it's actually like a series of small planes back to back. The finish, because you're actually planing and cutting the wood with these teeth, the finish that you get is extremely smooth and crisp. So for what it's worth, I thought I would throw that in the video. Okay, before we leave the fixture here, one last demonstration. We got a piece of 42 thousandths thick wood in here. A little bit too thin to use a regular plane on. So we'll get out the small guy. There we go. So with that, let's leave the wood section and let's go ahead and talk about a few tips and techniques on the metal side. Okay, for you guys out there that do the big work, the big stuff, here's a couple of strap clamps. These are one of my favorite here. It's kind of what I patterned my miniature one after. The big guys, they come in all shapes and sizes. However, in doing the smallest strap clamp that I've been able to find commercially, and I've made several custom ones. This is typically the smallest one that you can buy commercially. It has a 1/4 inch socket head cap screw or thumb screw for tightening, adjusted them. I've made a batch of these over the years. This little guy here is referred to as a finger saver. It's they've been around for a while. This has got some B channels for holding round stock, etc. And it's just got a typical strap clamp in there for holding down your parts for drilling. And you know, if you got a bigger piece, you could use multiples to hold it for milling. Well, the idea occurred to me, it would be nice to make a strap clamp of this design, but a lot smaller. Let me move the camera right here and I'll show you a setup I was using the other day on the mill. Cameras. Here's a sample of a small one that I made. It's holding on a little fixture board. It's holding a casting for a miniature flintlock that's going to be drilled. The way I made these guys, it's fairly quick and easy to make a batch of them. I ran off a dozen. I don't think it took me more than 15-20 minutes. But what we did is took a piece of fan pipe, your typical ceiling fan, the pipe that is used to either hold the fan or to extend it if you want it, you got a higher ceiling. And this brass pipe, you can get it at Home Depot, Lowe's, most any places. It's got a little over 1/16 of an inch wall thickness. And what I did is I took a section of this pipe, and the first operation was I put it in a vise and I squeezed it, and I converted the shape of the round pipe to an oval. And again, I just put in the vise and just crunched it a little bit till I got the round oval profile that I was looking for to kind of follow the contour of the strap clamps. Okay. After that, go to the bandsaw and put a slit right down the center of the crushed oval tube. And then you bandsaw off a section of it. And you get 2 out of each cut there. And once you've bandsawed it, you put them in the mill and put an elongated slot down the center. Nothing difficult at all about making the guys. Okay, what's remarkable though is the amount of holding power that you get for small parts using these guys, particularly for holding plate and small pieces of wooden stock. They work just like any other strap clamp, except you've only got one screw, and you set it, align it. Now, in holding the sheet that I milled the other day in the CNC operation, it was a lot more secure, a lot safer than using double-sided tape. You don't have to worry about the tape breaking loose, once the metal gets hot, etc. So, put that in your bag of tricks there, and if you ever need a small strap clamp, go to Home Depot and get you some fan tubing, and you can whip out a bunch of them in no time at all. With that, I think that kind of wraps it up for today. Hopefully you've picked up on a few things that you could use later on. And with that, we'll close it with the standard. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and have a nice day, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot.